Let's talk about your number one seed, Miami Heat. Why not, right? Because we saw the turmoil on the bench. We'll run through this. Originally, I was going to do kind of an East breakdown because it actually gets pretty interesting when you start looking at some of the East records and how they do against the West. And even though we feel like the East is better, and it is better, there's stuff that I'll just use next week. I think I'll do it next week because as I was going through it, I was like, wait, do we really know what's going to happen? And by the way, we don't. All right. But the Heat are your one seed. And every time you look at the standings, you're like, yep, they're still a one seed. And it's a team that defends like crazy, that I really like, that have missed big time chunks of the season from their three best players. And we have to take them seriously. But then I'm like, wait, if I like Miami's defense so much, then why wouldn't I just go ahead and pick Boston? And we can do the Boston thing when we get into the East as well, as they just are stomping teams and just put it on Utah like that too. And I still think Utah's a decent team. But really last night, in the NBA world, and what this open is about today, is Jimmy Butler. So in the third quarter, Golden State goes on a 19-0 run. Miami has a timeout. Brian Windhorst said there was a specific closeout that Butler didn't get to. I mean, shocker, we're in March, late March, and a vet didn't get out on the closeout. And Spo and Butler get into it. Now, you can see whatever happened where Butler's back is to us to the video footage that we saw from a fan. So as we see Spo and Butler going back and forth, at one point, whatever Butler says, Spo, you can read his lips, says back to him, he's like, you want me to fucking fight you? Right? Kyle Lowry's like, I'm out. PJ Tucker makes a face where he's kind of like, what just happened? And then he's kind of back to whatever he's doing. But Udonis Haslem, who's been there for 2 decades, is not having it and gets into it with Butler. Is like, I'll beat your ass. I'll beat your ass. All right. And Butler didn't seem to want a ton of that. Despite, I think we'd all agree, Butler's a tough guy too. But then we get a different angle from above where it just keeps going. And this is the part that's a little weird. All right. It's weird in that there seemed to be one player that was kind of holding Butler back, but it felt like the rest of the team was cool with Spo going at Butler. And then he slammed his clipboard down and kept going. And then I thought the best part of it was that Butler and Spo, even the times where it looked like Spo was kind of like, do you really want some of this? Which is not usually the best look for your team. But in the moment, as I say all the time, we're not always the best at trying to figure out what it actually means, because it could mean everything. It could mean nothing. I don't know what it means at this point. But I thought it was kind of crazy that it kept going, and it didn't seem like any of the teammates really cared. It felt like they had Spoelstra's side. And then they kind of came to a head at the end where they were very close to each other and they were animated and kind of talking out the whole point. All right. So did the Heat culture die last night? Not if you ask Heat culturists, because this is only going to make them stronger, right? Cracks in the foundation? Probably not. Like I said, I think a lot of this stuff happens, but last night was aggressive. So it comes down to 2 camps. If you're a Heat fan, awesome. This is great. This is exactly how we're built different. If you want the Heat to lose and you think they're overrated, then you think this is part of the end. And we don't have that answer right now. But really, this becomes a Jimmy Butler story and the Jimmy Butler timeline. So let's revisit, because it is a long one. And it is, I to be nice, I edited this to try to like, hey, I'm not going to bring up every single time Jimmy Butler got mad at somebody, because you know what? As I was digging through it this morning, it's a very long list. But Jimmy Butler should be appreciated. Yes, I did like him coming out of the draft. He scored 2.6 points per game in 42 games his rookie year. He played 8 minutes per game. All right. As a 22-year-old rookie, Jimmy Butler's playing 8 minutes a game. His second year, he starts 20 at 82 games, scores 8.5 points per game. In his third year, he finally were like, wait, okay, there's something here, 13 points per game. There's an argument to be made that he should have been played earlier. This is not a guy that was 18 coming in. He was 22. I've also said numerous times, I think the NBA evaluation thing is a little bit different in that we've had more developmental stars, where players who look like complete projects, have no idea, turn into some of the game's best players. And that's usually not the way that this happens, which adds another wrinkle to it. So as Butler's coming into his own in that third season, Derrick Rose comes back during Butler's fourth season. Rose, to this point, had played 39 games in 11 and 12. He missed all of 12-13, played 10 games in 13-14. So Butler's fourth year is the first season in about 3 years where Rose is actually giving you some decent numbers. And if you watch those Bulls games, you could see that Rose is like, look, this is my city. It's my team. Sorry, I've missed almost 3 years, but I'd like my team back. And Butler's like, yeah, I'm actually good now. And Butler, after those first 3 years in his fourth, fifth, and sixth season, made 3 straight all-star teams with the Bulls. And Butler's like, no, it's kind of my team. And by the way, Butler was right. He was better than Derrick Rose at that point. If you watch that team play on offense, it was awful, because they would just basically go back and forth taking turns of whose team it was. You couldn't play basketball that way. And at that point, I'd sided with Butler. I also had information that I shared on ESPN years ago, and that one of the other reasons Butler was always so mad, and again, I would say he came into the league mad and then had more reasons to be mad, and justifiably so, is that Chicago, when they were making him contract offers, they were kind of fucking with him a little bit, being like, look, if you don't take this, like it's still not really your team. We're not quite sure what your numbers are going to be, almost implying that he may not get all the minutes that he needs to get the numbers for a contract that he thought he was deserving of. I believe that's true. I double checked it. I had somebody who ran into Jimmy Butler later on saying, hey, did you hear what that ESPN guy said about the contract thing? Butler said, yeah, he's absolutely right. I'm sure no one from Chicago would agree. As far as front office side of it, none of those guys are there anymore. It doesn't matter. But it made sense. And I got it from somebody who was very reliable and double checked it. So when I was hearing all that stuff, I'm like, look, the basketball part of it tells me that Butler's right. And the history tells me that Butler's right to be upset. So Rose gets traded after 15-16. Butler's got the Bulls do himself in 16-17. And then that starts going off the rails because Butler, remember we had that post about like how much his teammates sucked? Or excuse me, he started complaining about his teammates a ton. He started crushing Hoiberg all the time. And he might have been right about Hoiberg. But then there was another weird element to it, too, where Dwayne Wade agreed with Butler. Then Rajon Rondo, of all people, posted something on Instagram essentially saying that the big three, the vets of the Celtics run of his earlier part of his career, would have never done this to the younger guys. So then you're like, well, I don't know who to believe here at this whole point. So guess what? Butler gets his way. He's pissed off at the world. He gets traded to Minnesota while he's still under contract. But that's important because he wanted a new contract from Minnesota. So he's with the Timberwolves in 17-18. There's all sorts of stuff that you can go look it up. I'm not going to recite all of it here. There's a weird plane incident. There's another thing where his teammates aren't good enough. He didn't want to play. He missed a bunch of time towards the end of the regular season. There's a game where he didn't want to go back in, apparently. I don't remember all of it. I was looking it all up. They lost to the Rockets in 5 games in the first round. His numbers are bad, but to be fair to Butler, he had missed a huge chunk at the end of the regular season with this knee thing, so he wasn't entirely healthy either. But then he doesn't do his exit interview. He demands a trade because he's mad about the contract offer. There was another part where apparently Butler was mad the team didn't restructure other things or get rid of other people so that they'd have more money to pay him, which I don't think is going to go over really well in the locker room. And then when Butler doesn't get his trade over the course of that offseason, he comes back to Minnesota. And then we have the infamous practice where Butler coordinates it all because the jump happens to be in town where he does the sit down with Rachel Nichols, which I've talked about all the time. And by the way, I was never criticizing the jump about it. Good for you. It's a great get. If anybody said to you, hey, Ryen Russillo, NBA star, fill in the blank, is really pissed off and wants to do an interview with you, you do it every single time. But from Butler's side of it, totally coordinated. He plays apparently with the third stringers against Wiggins and Towns and just berates them the entire scrimmage, apparently wins it. Woj has a tweet on it where he's like, you fucking need me. All right. And he's calling out Wiggins and Towns, who at that point, I don't think anybody's going to go back retroactively and say Jimmy Butler was wrong about the passion of 2 younger players that were supremely talented but hadn't quite figured it out yet. And yes, the Timberwolves needed him, but he didn't get the contract that he wanted. And they were like, okay, this is untenable. And at that point, I think ownership steps in. They trade Jimmy Butler to Philadelphia. Now, in Philadelphia, he's got kind of the same problem, just a different geographic spot in the country, where he's with Philadelphia, a better team, clearly, and a nice little, playoff round there against Toronto. Could have gone the other way. Who knows? But Butler explained this in the JJ Redick podcast on his exit from Philadelphia, a bunch of different things, where he was mad about his teammates and their effort. He was mad about the trainers. He was mad about the lack of leadership. He said there was no direction, which, by the way, all of us, I think, could have any single job and start finding ways to get pissed about the structure above us, because I think that's kind of how we're all built. But Butler is now starting to develop a trend where it seems like everywhere you go, you are upset about the level of effort not meeting your level of effort. You can be right about that, but there's also a way of handling it. And if you're doing it every single time, every single place you go, it can start to become a you problem. And I think that's where it started with Butler. Butler makes a really good point about the playoffs, where he felt like all of a sudden Brett Brown, which I don't think he had a ton of respect for, which he basically admits numerous times, either hinting at it and then I think after the fact being like, it was professional. Well, if you're saying it was professional, it means you don't really like the guy. Where he was mad that Ben Simmons, big-time playoff Ben Simmons, all of a sudden was not the on-ball creator that he had been during the regular season. A lot of those bigger decisions were left to Jimmy Butler. And that part, I would side with Jimmy Butler, because as I had heard after the fact, he just kind of felt like, I have to be the grown-up here of Philadelphia. These guys can't kind of carry themselves. They've been losing all the time. And now I'm here to save the day, but it's kind of their team and it's built around them. Fuck this. I'm out. Sign and trade Miami Heat. And if you looked at just the Philadelphia thing, if you just looked at the Minnesota thing and just looked at the Chicago thing, I think at that point you'd be like, you know what? I think I might agree with Jimmy Butler in a bunch of these different different positions that he has. So he gets to Miami, he gets his money, he gets his team, and they go on this incredible run. And we can diminish it if we want because of the bubble part of it. I don't think the Miami Heat team that got to the finals is a great team. It wasn't. It wasn't a great team, but it was a really nice run. And they get to the finals. They don't have the size. They're not going to beat Anthony Davis and LeBron. All right. Butler, and I would never tell any player like, hey, you shouldn't think you're this good, but he has flirted with that top 10 neighborhood despite never really being that guy. I think he's really good. I just don't think he's ever been that guy. And when you're not that guy and you're always pissed and there always seems to be a bad breakup, you can be right about a lot of things, but it doesn't mean that you're always right about everything. And I think to this point, Butler's always thought he's right about every single deal. I can understand the Chicago part, Minnesota, Philadelphia. We've been through it. The Spo part is going to be challenging for me. Now, Spo handled it like a magician after the fact. We were arguing about where we were going to go to dinner. I watched his post-game presser. Spo gets it. He's been around forever. He's one of the best coaches. So if you're talking about the best coaches in the NBA, the conversation includes Erik Spoelstra. I can't say definitively one is better than everybody else. I'd have to have somebody smarter at basketball than me to explain specifically why this one guy is head and shoulders above everyone else. But the conversation, if it's 2, 3, 5 guys, it can't happen without Erik Spoelstra. Erik Spoelstra is not Andrew Wiggins, not knowing who he is. Andrew Wiggins' brother tweeting out hallelujah when Butler demanded a trade in Minnesota. And Butler being like, are you fucking serious, dude? Are you serious? You're fucking with me? Again, I think I take Butler's side in that one. Erik Spoelstra is not Ben Simmons in a playoff spot being like, I'm not super comfortable with creating plays here, okay? Erik Spoelstra is not Derrick Rose trying to reclaim his team in City when he's not the same player. Erik Spoelstra is a guy that's won championships, has been a steady force for a franchise that's reinvented itself a bunch of different times. So on this one, even though it may not mean a ton, it's a hard one to then say this pattern of behavior is the same. There's a great Kobe Bryant quote Phil Jackson had in one of his books. I've mentioned it before, but it's incredible. Kobe was always pissed at his teammates all the time. He was pissed at them all the time because Kobe's level of effort, his investment in the game was beyond all of his teammates. And Phil said to him, he goes, whatever your 10 is, that's unobtainable for all these other guys. Like their 10 is your 6 or 7, but they don't know that there's another, like it's incomprehensible to them that there's this next level. It's never going to happen. So the sooner you accept that, the happier that you're going to be. And it's a very smart quote. It's enlightening to make sense. It's like, stop asking somebody to reach this level that they are incapable of. And that's why this makes you so special. The problem is Jimmy Butler's not Kobe Bryant. The problem is that he's carrying himself this way and he's demanding this from his teammates. And he's always pissed, even if he's right to be pissed. You can't be pissed off at the world all the time, even if you're right. And the fucked up part about this is the Heat, as I said at the very top, the number 1 seed, if they're playing a full-strength Brooklyn in a 1-8 matchup, who are you taking? So if they lose that, it's not going to be because of this. But if Butler starts his exit again, or if this all starts to happen again, it has been the story for him every single chapter of his NBA career.